Welcome to Knife Chats. If you like what you see, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, share it with friends, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Thank you.
The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was translated by Fitzgerald back in 1859. And in there, it has a description of what most people consider the idyllic picnic. And the verse goes like this: a book of verses underneath a bough, a jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou beside me singing in the wilderness. O wilderness were paradise enow. Well, and obviously everyone is very familiar with that one line: a jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou, referring to somebody's loved one who they're out on a picnic. Usually there's more than just a jug of wine and a loaf of bread. There's usually like cheese and wine and other things, as well as a nice blanket to sit out on and do other things on, especially when it's a romantic couple going off out into the wilderness to be alone for a while. And the thing is there's also one thing that's missing from that, because if you've got that jug of wine and a loaf of bread and possibly cheeses and meats and everything, you also kind of need a corkscrew and a knife to cut all that stuff with. So you also need what's known as a picnic knife. And that's what we'll be talking about today. It's also interesting that the picnic knife actually has its origins in France, considering the word picnic also has its origins in France. It actually derives from the two words pique-nique, which basically is like peck and small, so eating something small is what picnic meant, and it just turned into, in the English, picnic, P-I-C-N-I-C, as opposed to P-I-Q-U-E, N-I-Q-U-E. And this brings us to the knife known as the picnic knife. Now, before anyone starts screaming that, no, that's not a picnic knife, and starts leaving nasty comments, let me explain. So the knife actually predates picnicking, but when picnicking took off and became popular, this knife was the ideal knife for picnicking, simply because of the arrangement that comes with it. You have a large blade on top, which is ideal for, cutting just about anything you need to cut. You can cut your fruit with it, your meats, your cheeses, your bread, whatever you need to cut. You have a nice large blade for doing the cutting. And then on the back side, you have a corkscrew. And the corkscrew would have been used for opening your bottle of wine. And actually, before 1890, before the crown cork, before the bottle cap was around, a lot of other things beside wine were also sealed with a cork. So any kind of other beverage that might come in a container that had a cork holding it closed, you have a corkscrew here to pull out the cork. And that's it for the knife. I mean, you just got a large frame knife on a powder horn frame, a modified powder horn frame with a corkscrew added to the back end. And this was known as a picnic knife. It was thrown in the basket and taken out there and used. But as I mentioned, it was around before picnicking was around. And before then, the knife was actually known as a shepherd's knife. So looking at the knife as a shepherd would look at the knife, or anyone else who was a day laborer, somebody who is working out in a field, the knife is, again, an ideal knife for their needs. You've got the large blade on the top that's going to help them cut up their midday meal, and you've got the corkscrew on the back side that is also going to aid in opening their bottle of wine or whatever else they might be drinking during their noon meal, or even a late breakfast kind of meal. So the knife was being used well before picnicking took off by anyone who was out in the field, and it was typically known as a shepherd's knife for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was very popular among sheep herders, but also this cross here. If you notice, it's got a cross made of 7 pins, 7 brass pins, And this is very common on the knives, and if you notice, it is upside down when you're holding the top of the knife up. And that's the way it was normally done. And the reason is because that's not the way the shepherd would be looking at the cross. What he would do is he would open up the blade of the knife, stick it in the ground, and then he'd have a focal point here for the cross. It would be right side up now, and the cross would be there so that he would be able to do his prayers, either his meal prayers or any other prayer that he would have during the day that he would be saying. Got to remember, this is a couple hundred years ago when people were much more religious and were committed to doing their prayers, and this allowed the shepherd to basically bring Christ with him anywhere he wanted to go. And I've also heard that the reason there are 7 brass pins in the cross, you notice there's 1 on the top, 3 across the middle to make the bar, and then 3 more going down. So there's a total of 7 brass pins there. And from what I understand, the reason there's 7 brass pins is to remind you of the last 7 words that Christ spoke from upon the cross, which were, "Unto your hands I commend my spirit." So there's a lot of meaning behind the shepherd's knife, and that's why I'm sure a lot of people look at this knife and say it's not a picnic knife, it's a shepherd's knife. And indeed, if you're looking at age-wise, if you're looking at the first name given to these knives, it is indeed a shepherd's knife, not a picnic knife. There's also another name that is given to these knives, and that is Leol. Now, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm saying it as close as I can, but that is because of the little either horsefly or bumblebee, whatever you want to call it, on the back side here. This is a symbol of knives that were made in Leol, France. I've heard it pronounced a couple different ways. Matter of fact, I was watching a video of people in France, first language French, going to Leol, France, and being asked to pronounce the word. The word is actually spelled Laguiole. Laguiole. Leguiole. Any case, they had French speakers going to the town and asking, and they would ask them, "How do you pronounce the name of the town?" They would show them how it was spelled, and they must have had people saying it 4 or 5 different ways. No one was in consensus on it, and in fact, even the people who live in the town disagree on how to say Leol. I know I'm butchering it completely. I don't have a French accent or anything, so I'm sure I'm screwing it up. But it's a very difficult word to spell even for people in France. In any case, because of this symbol, which is very common on any of these knives, for instance, this one, in case you didn't notice, it's made by Right Edge. And you can see right here on the back, it says China. China is not in France the last time I checked. Right Edge is an American company that produces its products in China, or Pakistan. But in any case, you see they have the bumblebee or the horsefly on the back here, which leads people to refer to these knives as Leol knives, which is really a discredit for knives that are actually made in Leol, France, because those are some of the top quality knives made in France. So if you're going to call this knife anything, either call it a picnic knife or a shepherd knife. Do not call it a Leol knife. That's just a discredit to that place. As for other knives I have here, here's another one. Notice now the cross is right side up, and that's because it was not made in France. It's a relatively modern one. Notice the B looks a little bit different. Still, it's a pretty good knife. It's made with buffalo horn handles, and it's got a better corkscrew than the one you see on the Right Edge. But you do see, once again, you have some kind of file work going along the spine of the spring, as well as along the spine. And that is very common among these picnic knives or shepherd knives. They almost always have some kind of file work, and I think that is because the originals out of Laon, France, are well made with file work and such. So, and it's also something that is supposed to be a little bit decorative. Now, this one, like I said, has the cross this way, so you would end up holding the knife in your hand if you're going to be saying your prayers. And still has a very strong little pigtail on the bottom here, which is very common on, well, it's really what makes the shepherd's knife or the picnic knife the shepherd's knife or picnic knife. Another version up here, this one is very confusing because it actually says Laon on here, but it is made by Palladio. It's not made by one of the original companies in Laon, France, that were making the top of the line knives. But this one's definitely a modern take on the picnic knife or the peasant knife. I'm sorry, the shepherd's knife, and it's kind of good. It's got a liner lock main blade that opens with a thumb stud. It's got the lever here, which is used for hooking onto the edge of the wine bottle so that you can screw in and aid in pulling out the corkscrew. And also it has a cap lifter added to it. So thinking ahead a little bit, and there's another type of picnic or shepherd's knife, but there's also other ones that are out there that do not look like the typical or the historic peasant knife, or I'm sorry, shepherd's knife, or picnic knife. We'll start with this one here, which is by Victorinox. It's their 111 millimeter picnicker, and you see it's basically got added items to it, but you've got the main blade and the corkscrew here, as well as the other common tools that you find on every Swiss Army knife, it seems. The can opener and the cap lifter screwdriver here, as well as the punch or awl over here. But this was actually called a picnicker when it first came out by Victorinox, and you see it has additional tools to this. In actuality, just about any 111 millimeter Victorinox knife that has a corkscrew could be kind of thrown in with the picnickers. And matter of fact, the one knife that they do not call a picnicker is the 108 millimeter knife that's known as the Solo Plus, which basically has a main blade and a corkscrew, and that's it. So definitely has the blades of a picnicker, but they called it the Solo Plus. Now another knife that's a derivative of the picnicker is right here by Opinel. It is a number 10 Opinel, and it has your main blade, which locks with your collar lock here. And then on the side here, we'll see, we lock it over, and we can close it back up. But on the other side over here, you see a corkscrew, and I think they call this their wine and cheese knife, which is two of the ingredients of any picnic. But you see it's got a wonderful corkscrew there and a main blade similar to this, arranged differently, but that is Opinel's picnic knife, or shepherd's knife if you want to call it that. And it's really interesting that the corkscrew actually has a snap to it. So there is some kind of spring holding the corkscrew in place. But the main blade is your typical friction lock folder that you find on any Opinel. And definitely a worthwhile knife if you're into picnics or into being a sheep herder. So Opinel also made a derivative of that, and it's around now. And finally, one other knife that you can see has its origins in the picnic knife is the large lady's leg knife. Now, leg knives were around long ago. They date all the way back to the time of the Roman Empire, but it wasn't until the 1910s or 1920s that someone came up with the idea of actually making the shoe here into a bottle opener or cap lifter. And so while it doesn't have a corkscrew, it has something to remove the crown cork, and otherwise it has the same tool or same kind of blade or similar blade to what you see on the old shepherd's knife. So basically this is a version of the picnic knife or the shepherd's knife, where you're actually opening a bottle that has a cap instead of a corkscrew or a cork. But otherwise, yeah, it very much in tune with the picnic knife or the shepherd's knife, or at least it's a derivative of it, even though the pattern leg knives were around for probably 2,000 years. Any case, I guess any knife that has a corkscrew and a large blade on it could be considered a picnic knife. Here's one by Mercury that is basically laid out very much like a Victorinox Spartan, except it has a fork over here, so that would be really helpful. But these were the original ones. These were the original picnic knife, which in fact was really a shepherd's knife. And please do not call it a Léole, even though these knives have their origin in Léole, France, just as the word picnic also has its origins in France. So hope that helps you out a little bit. Another interesting pattern from history, the shepherd's knife or the picnic knife. Just don't call it the Léole knife, because while Léole made those knives, they have made so many other knives too. And the pattern shows up being made by all sorts of companies today.
Thank you for visiting Knife Chats. I hope you enjoyed your time here. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel and ringing that notification bell so that you will be notified when the next episode of Knife Chats is up online. Thanks again. See you soon.